breakdown here.
So this isn't an intellectual breakdown. This is a bad conversation about politics with your family at Thanksgiving. There has to be a better factual analysis than, isn't it weird? Isn't it weird that, so the 34 felonies that he was charged with and convicted of in New York State, he did those.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Really glad you're here today because we've got something intense to break down. So in this video, we're watching Destiny go head-to-head with Dinesh D'Souza in what turned into one of the most heated political debates I've seen in a while. They're going back and forth on legal cases, classified documents, and whether we're even living in the same reality anymore. Dinesh is making some bold claims about political persecution, and Destiny is not letting a single one of them slide without receipts. You're definitely going to want to stick around for this one because the exchange gets real, and there are some moments where the logic just completely falls apart on one side. And hey, real quick, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing where all of you are tuning in. So don't be shy. All right, let's get into it.
So let me offer a couple thoughts. Number one, if you're right that a bungled legal effort failed on account of the incompetence of the people who tried to prove the fraud, I would argue by the same token that the Democratic goofballs who launched 90-plus charges against Trump in multiple jurisdictions were equally dumb because they made claims that they were unable to sustain. The cases were thrown out, made moot, exposed to the public for their prima facie idiocy, or they capsized of their own weight. They were withdrawn. Fani Willis was basically had her own problems and had to withdraw. The successors basically decided that's the end of that. So what I'm getting at is either we rely on the legal process as a pretty fair adjudicator of these kinds of claims, in which case you got to grant that the case against Trump ended up, think of it, you didn't have one shot. You had like 7 shots at this guy. You failed on all of them. Even in the one place where you, quote, got him on the ultimate bogus case, which was in New York, the judge himself was too timid to impose a verdict and basically says, Mr. Trump, you can go. I wish you well. Even the judge knew that he was part of a political game and he had to fess up. Because if he was really enforcing the law, think of it, if you or I were found guilty of 34 felonies, the judge would have said, I'm imposing a sentence. My sentence might be overturned or maybe held to be invalid, but this man has broken the law 34 times. In fact, think of the stupidity. This was 34 different checks, so apparently it's 34 different felonies. The lawfare of it couldn't be more obvious or blatant. Now,
why did the jury convict him? Why did the jury convict him in New York?
What's that?
Why did the jury convict him if it was just lawfare?
Because a jury in New York, like a jury in D.C., is going to be... Well, all right.
Aren't you saying then that half the country is living in delusion if you can't even trust a jury of every single person, that a single person could say, I don't agree with the verdict here?
You think the OJ jury got it right?
The OJ, that's a totally different case with factual accounting.
If you trust the jury, then they got it right.
I can say that juries might... I can say, I can disagree with juries sometimes. You just said that there are 2 sections of the United States, in New York and D.C., and I'm willing to bet you'd say other states, where there is no jury that could hear... Well, I'm curious, actually. Fine. There are things in the OJ case that I think it seems like he was clearly guilty of something. What law in New York State that he was convicted of breaking, that he received one of his 34 felony counts for, do you think he didn't actually break? Did he not lie when he paid his lawyer Cohen a fee that was actually just a money transfer to Stormy Daniels and then commit a bookkeeping fraud on the furtherance of that lie, which is why the misdemeanor was upgraded to a felony? Do you think that's not true?
One of the problems with living in this kind of society today, and one of the essential defining elements of lawfare, is simply to ask this question. If anybody else did that, or if Trump himself did it, but was not running for president, would these charges have been brought? And again, we're all watching this. We're not on the jury. We're watching this as spectators from the outside. We've got to use a certain rule of common sense. You have this guy, Trump. He's in the thick of New York real estate. He's in the thick of all these claims of bombastic claims, my Mar-a-Lago's worth X, this is worth Y, my assets are worth this. Everybody does this. Now, if all of this was so fraudulent, how does the man go 75 years of his life without a single charge? Then, interestingly, he enters politics as a Republican. 93 charges are dropped on his head. Now, if you genuinely think, and look, we could very well in this audience be exploring the delusions we're talking about. If you genuinely are a smart guy and you think, I think that's right.
This is exactly what happens when someone tries to rewrite reality in real time. Dinesh is sitting here saying the prosecutors were dumb, that they had 7 shots at this guy and failed on all of them. But here's what he's conveniently leaving out. The cases didn't fail because there was no evidence. They got derailed by procedural delays, by judges appointed during his own administration, by the Supreme Court inventing presidential immunity out of thin air. That's not the same thing as being innocent. That's the system protecting power. And then Destiny hits him with the perfect question. He says, why did the jury convict him in New York? Why did the jury convict him if it was just lawfare? And watch what Dinesh does. He immediately pivots to saying, well, a jury in New York or D.C. is going to be biased. So now we're at the point where conservatives don't trust juries anymore. They don't trust courts. They don't trust prosecutors. They don't trust voters in certain states. At what point do you just admit you don't believe in the legal system at all, unless it benefits your side? Destiny pushes back again and says, you just said that there are 2 sections of the United States in New York and D.C. where no jury could hear this fairly. So you're telling me half the country is living in delusion because they can't be trusted to serve on a jury. That's the logical conclusion of what Dinesh is arguing, and he has no answer for that. He just deflects to the OJ case like that's somehow equivalent. But here's where Destiny really corners him. And he asks, did he not lie when he paid his lawyer Cohen a fee that was actually just a money transfer to Stormy Daniels, and then commit a bookkeeping fraud on the furtherance of that lie, which is why the misdemeanor was upgraded to a felony? That's the actual crime, not some abstract lawfare conspiracy. The man falsified business records to cover up hush money payments during an active campaign. That's a felony under New York law, and Dinesh can't dispute the facts, so instead, he just keeps asking, well, would they have charged anyone else for this? As if selective prosecution somehow makes you innocent. It doesn't. You either committed the crime or you didn't.
The guy was squeaky clean for 75 years. Then he became a habitual criminal and committed 93 offenses, warranting the guy being jailed for life, a guy who just happens to have been the president of the United States and on the verge of being reelected a second time. But you don't have to worry about that if you can put him away. And this doesn't raise any issues of political targeting, Stalinism, find me the man and I'll find you the crime. If you genuinely don't think any of that is at issue, then we are at a little bit of an intellectual breakdown here.
So this isn't an intellectual breakdown. This is a bad conversation about politics with your family at Thanksgiving. There has to be a better factual analysis than, isn't it weird? Isn't it weird that, so the 34 felonies that he was charged with and convicted of in New York State, he did those. For the Mar-a-Lago documents case, this is the thing, he couldn't have possibly been charged with a crime like this before having a security clearance or being in a job with security clearance because he wouldn't have had access to these documents. So for the Mar-a-Lago case, he took classified material from the White House, stored it in an area where classified material is now to be kept. Yep. He showed other people some of that classified material, and then he resisted efforts from NARA and the FBI to retrieve said material, and he was directing his employees to hide it and lie to the FBI when they were requesting information about this material. This is incredibly unique.
The first part of that is true, and all the rest of it is not true.
Which part of it was not true?
The first part of it, that he took the documents, is true. The second question is, how does a president who takes his own documents, which he has the plenary power to declassify, how does he prima facie violate the law, especially when you consider that pretty much every other president, going back to Nixon, had documents. Mike Pence had documents. Joe Biden had documents in his garage, including a bunch sitting in his car. These documents were fully exposed. There were documents at the Penn Biden Center, accessible to everyone. And yet the guy who looks into it goes, I don't think we should charge this guy because he's kind of forgetful and he won't really withstand trial because he tends not to remember things. I mean, since when does somebody get a pass from a serious offense because they don't have a very good memory of the stuff that they manifestly did? So when you suddenly develop this kind of selective aggression, Trump has done all these things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you conveniently forget that presidents have routinely taken their own stuff. Then again, I have to say that this looks to me quite clearly a case of isolating Trump. I mean, the way we know...
Well, here, real quick, just on this, because you laid out some facts and the factual...
You said he obstructed... Well,
wait, real quick. So you say these words, prima facie. Prima facie means has the person who is under the jurisdiction of some place, has he met the prerequisite elements to have committed the crime? So the crime of retention of classified materials requires intent. So one funny thing that conservatives like to do is they like to say that, well, Herr said that Biden was forgetful and he wouldn't be able to stand trial because of his forgetfulness. That's not true. What Herr was speaking to when he was speaking of Biden's state of mind was that he probably forgot that he had these documents here or that he was storing these things. The crime that speaks, the federal statutes that talk about the retention of classified material that makes it a crime is knowing that you actually have them. That's why when Biden contacted NARA.
Okay, so Dinesh just made the argument that blows up his entire case. He says, the guy was squeaky clean for 75 years, then he became a habitual criminal and committed 93 offenses, and he's saying this like it's absurd, like it's impossible. But Destiny immediately destroys this with one sentence. He says, this isn't an intellectual breakdown. This is a bad conversation about politics at your family Thanksgiving. Because that 75 years argument only works if you ignore basic logic. Destiny explains it perfectly. He says, he couldn't have possibly been charged with a crime like this before having a security clearance or being in a job with security clearance because he wouldn't have had access to these documents. So for the Mar-a-Lago case, he took classified material from the White House. This is the moment where Dinesh's entire defense collapses, because the crime he's accused of, retaining classified documents, showing them to unauthorized people, obstructing the FBI, those are crimes that only a president or someone with clearance can commit. A real estate developer in New York can't steal nuclear secrets because he doesn't have access to them. That's not evidence of innocence. That's just how security clearances work. And this gets to something really important that people need to understand. The conservative media has spent years framing this as political persecution. But if you actually look at what happened, the timeline is clear. The National Archives asked for documents back. He refused. They asked again. He refused. The FBI got involved. He still refused. And then when they finally served a warrant, his own employees were caught on camera moving boxes to hide them. That's not a negotiation. That's obstruction of justice. Destiny keeps hammering this point because it matters. The crime that speaks to the federal statutes that talk about the retention of classified material that makes it a crime is knowing that you actually have them. Intent matters, and we know he had intent because he was recorded showing those documents to people and saying he should have declassified them but didn't. His own words prove the crime. Meanwhile, when Pence found documents, he called the FBI immediately. When the current administration found documents, they called the FBI immediately. They cooperated. That's why they weren't charged. Not because of some conspiracy, because cooperation versus obstruction is the difference between a mistake and a crime.
Contacted the FBI and said, hey, we have classified documents here. We think you guys should come and grab them. They weren't convicted or charged with any crimes because it seems like they weren't trying to intentionally store classified material, as opposed to Donald Trump, who was showing documents to people, and you say, well, they were his, right? Why did he say twice, I could have unclassified these, or I could have declassified these, but I didn't? And also, as a second quick thing, the president does not have plenary authority for declassification of everything, especially when it comes to the Department of Energy, which has nuclear secrets, especially when you're talking about TSSCI, SAP, separate access programs, or special access programs that are part of our nuclear secrets that Donald Trump was keeping at Mar-a-Lago. So even that he couldn't have declassified on his own.
Here's the problem. I mean, had this case proceeded all the way and these elements of the crime that you're describing been proven, we could then debate what was going on. I'll give you the Trump side of it. I took these documents. I was contacted by the National Archives, NARA, I guess it's called, about the fact you need to give some of these documents back. What does some mean here? Trump is like, some of them may be mine, some of them I may have to return. And so a process now begins of bargaining back and forth. At one point, the FBI comes to Mar-a-Lago. Remember, Mar-a-Lago is a protected facility. Comes to Mar-a-Lago and puts a padlock on the storage facility where the documents are held. So what are we dealing with here? We're dealing with a president who finishes his term. People come into the White House, clear all the stuff out. Where are they going to move it? They move it, not surprisingly, to the residence, Mar-a-Lago. And then begins this process of negotiating over these documents. If you're saying, based upon the fact that you think that laws were broken, I would say, what? Because Destiny thinks that the president broke the law, we should lock him up? No. If you can show me a legal process where these elements of the crime were proven, we could look at it.
Well,
But
there is.
it
That's what
didn't-
an indictment is showing these are the laws that we're saying that he broke. This is the evidence
I
we're
read the
presenting to the grand
indictment.
jury. Okay, well, then you know that the grand jury returned an okay to charge Donald Trump with these crimes.
Okay.
Also, you said that Mar-a-Lago was secured, not secured for the storage of classified information. And if Donald Trump truly had nothing to hide and he was cooperating and returning things as he should, why was he having his employee hide boxes from his own lawyers so that they would not be fully truthful, not of their own fault, but because they had no idea when they were communicating with the FBI about documents that Trump was retaining and that he was having brought to his room, going over, taking some back, keeping others, and then telling Nora, his employee, to lie to the lawyers about what they were hiding.
This is where Dinesh runs out of excuses, and Destiny just systematically closes every single escape route. He explains, when Biden contacted the FBI and said, "Hey, we have classified documents here. We think you guys should come and grab them." They weren't convicted or charged with any crimes, because intent is the entire basis of the law. If you accidentally have something and you immediately return it, that's not a crime. But if you know you have it, you refuse to return it, and you actively hide it from investigators, that's textbook criminal behavior. And then Destiny hits him with the smoking gun evidence. He says, "Why did he say twice I could have declassified these, but I didn't?" That's him admitting on tape that the documents were still classified. He knew they were classified. He knew he wasn't supposed to have them. And he showed them to people anyway. That alone is enough to prove the crime. But Dinesh keeps falling back on this idea that the president has unlimited declassification power, and that's where Destiny educates him in real time. He explains, the president does not have plenary authority for declassification of everything, especially when it comes to the Department of Energy, which has nuclear secrets, especially when you're talking about TSS, CISAP, separate access programs or special access programs that are part of our nuclear secrets. This is critical. Nuclear secrets fall under a completely different legal framework. The Department of Energy controls those classifications, not the president. So even if you believe in this magic declassification theory, which no court has ever recognized, it still wouldn't apply to the nuclear documents that were found at Mar-a-Lago. He never had the authority to take those, period. But the most damning part comes at the end. Destiny asks, why was he having his employee hide boxes from his own lawyers so that they would not be fully truthful, not of their own fault, but because they had no idea when they were communicating with the FBI about documents? This is the part that conservatives can never answer. Because if everything was legal, if he had every right to those documents, why hide them? Why lie to your own lawyers? Why move boxes around to avoid detection? That's consciousness of guilt. That's someone who knows they're breaking the law and is trying to cover it up. And here's what makes this so frustrating. We're not talking about some complex legal theory. We're talking about someone taking classified information, refusing to return it, showing it to unauthorized people, and then obstructing the investigation. That's multiple crimes. And the evidence is overwhelming. We have testimony. We have documents. We have recordings. We have his own words. But because of who he is, we're supposed to pretend it's all just politics. It's not. It's accountability. And the fact that so many people refuse to see that tells you everything about where we are as a country right now. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.